Hello, everyone. I want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining me today as we continue our weekly discussions based on the book, The Integral Human Being. I wanted to just give a 1 minute discussion on what are we talking about? Well, the psychological collection of the psychological series authored by Joanna de Angelis in collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco was first published, and it contains 16 books. This one specifically is the second of those that series, and it was published about 20 years ago, 20, um, 2000, right? In the whereabouts, 2000, 2002. So it's about 20 years old. And I wanted to just bring to us the idea that Joanna de Angelis, what is so important for us to remember when we study her books is that she created this very interesting bridge between spiritism and depth psychology. And we will be discussing throughout the series, including throughout these chapters of this book, some of the issues, some of alerts, as I call them, or even therapies that just she peppers throughout her work. And before we move on, I just wanted to pause and reflect with you. If we consider how vulnerable we are, this is a moment as humanity as a whole is undergoing so much pain and suffering. And this book is a gift because it discusses, as I said, the causes and solutions to many of our issues, including psychological or mental health issues. And I bring the language of Joanna de Angelis through my words because it is lovely how she brings point counterpoint. This is something that we find very strongly in, for example, the work of Carl Gustav Jung that she often refers to. Our focus is to bring up weekly topics found in this really great little book. And the ultimate goal is to ask ourselves, how do you and I ensure we have a sense of balance, a sense of stability, a sense of emotional and psychological maturity, despite everything that goes on around me. But let's go ahead and start talking a little bit more about the book or the structure of the book. Um, as you can see in the slide, the book has 40 chapters divided into 9 parts. And today's topic, called Degenerative Conflicts of Society, I know, mouthful, uh, but please note that the topics really range a great range of topics, from fear, insecurity, mental illnesses, all the way to death. And I invite you to explore with me those themes that Joan de Angelis brings to us. And as I said before, she brings through the lenses of spiritism and depth psychology. Shall we? So we're going to go ahead and get started here talking about what I label the topic of social transformation. Joanna introduces the chapter around the generative conflicts, and she brings to our attention the root cause, right? The overarching cause for those degenerative conflicts. And if we even stop for a second to think about what are degenerative conflicts, those are the conflicts that keep degenerating the fabric of whatever it is part of. So when we talk about degenerative conflicts of society, we are really saying that society as a whole has, for lack of a better word, a terminal disease such as cancer or autoimmune that slowly but surely starts to erode and dilute its own structure. But what she says are the causes is really lack of trust, right? This crisis that we're going through of credibility. And she also calls love. And by love, what I believe she means is without the systemic societal mechanism to ensure that all of us, 100% of us, are loved, that we are welcomed, that we are indeed taken care, right? Second, when we experience those issues or crisis of credibility and trust, right? She says, well, there is an impact to society as a whole, but also to us personally because it impacts, it clashes, it may start to disrupt our sense of self, our sense of being, our own personalities. When we to me the picture comes with a our body full of holes, right? When we start to lose a sense of who I am, I start to also lose my sense of direction, my moral compass, if you will. And we do this by losing our anchor, our bearings. We are unable, as a consequence, to perhaps distinguish right from wrong. Or, in so many words, we lose the ability to adapt to the larger surroundings, to the social fabric that makes us. And once we are no longer able, in order to adapt, to identify if the behavior norms of that group are aligned or in sync with what I need for my own well being. And that changes from everybody in general, right? So when we don't know what is good or bad for us, when we don't know what's good or bad for our community, and by community, I really think in terms of the insular community of your nucleus family, your larger family, your neighborhood, your city, your country, et cetera, right? So when we don't know what's good or bad, we are no longer able to have a sense of evaluation or reflection, right? When we are unable to really understand and evaluate that this is good, this is bad, or even further, if this bad, what I call it bad here, is perhaps something that is obsolete, right? Certain behaviors that are no longer adequate or appropriate to how we live today. Joanna de Angelis calls this abnormal behavior, right? And what she's saying here is that we are part of a society, right, that perhaps is ruled by those in that community that do not care or do not demonstrate that they care for the overarch peace and harmony, and instead, because they're back to their primarisms, right, their egocentric self-centered self, they may have directions or decisions that potentially will foster violence or, in some cases, anti-cultural, those are her words, movement. So let's think about it. What is she talking here is in her book, published 2022, a little over 20 years ago, Joanna was already addressing something that it is so present in our society today. This very, very polarized organism that we are part of, and we see that the social polarization everywhere we go. In fact, if we were to define social polarization, is simply put it as the segregation right? So compartmentalization, division within a given society. And usually in this case, I'm using the definition from an economic perspective that emerges when factors such as income inequality and or let's say real estate fluctuation or economic displacement result in the differentiation of social groups to high income or low income, right? This is from a social inequality perspective. When we think of those types of social polarization, and it may be economic, it can be racial, it can be religious, many different triggers to those types of polarization. But as a result, the tendency is the creation of groups at the extremities of the social hierarchy, and they grow in the both part. In the middle part, it starts to shrink, right? So I don't know if you're able to actually see my last discussion where we talked about countries, and this is based on the United Nations review, that the countries with economic uncertainty that also have inequality and institutional distrust. They breed chaos, anarchy, mistrust, and divisions instead of what we need, which is social transformation. And the United Nations, and I find it quite interesting when I saw the data, is the United Nations list the six most polarized countries. First two are in Latin America: Argentina, number one; Colombia, number two; United States, number three; and then moves on to South Africa, Spain, and Sweden. So, what strikes to me is at first when I saw those polarization is that all those six countries are developed countries, right? Or in the old nomenclature, first world countries, all of them. And you see that the ability to grow economically, technologically, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, did not prevent them from falling into this highly polarized society. There's a number of other research and those projects. They address the issues of social polarization specifically in developed economies like the United Nations. And the conclusion from those projects, those research studies, is that when social polarization happen in addition to economic restructuring, whatever that may be, and they specifically point to cities, economic inequality along with social class and racial lines is exacerbated. It grows exponentially. And I have to say, I live in a beautiful city. I live right downtown, Nashville, Tennessee, and I find it very easy to immediately picture what those studies are saying, because I live in the place of extreme wealth, extreme social power, overlaid with homelessness, and that reality that screams of deprivation, exclusion, and social decline. It really hurts me to say this, and but it is with this heavy heart that I echo Joanna de Angelis' words when she says human beings have not yet learned to be solidary in the event of divergent ideas, preferring to become solitary and adversarial. Okay. And when I say that, I'm going to go into a little bubble here because I'd like to talk about the some interesting um, work done by Julia Darr, and she is the managing director at Boston Consulting Group here in the US. And she's the global lead of that group's Behavioral Economics and Behavior Insights Initiative. Interesting, right? So, Julia Darr, who most likely you have not heard, gave a TED Talk, and the TED Talk was called How to Disagree Productively and Find Common Ground. Why was there this talk, or even a behavior insights initiative as relate to behavior economics, right? Uh, Simply put, when we talked about personal level, Julia Darr said in the talk, in the TED Talk, that I asked people at the outset of a conversation or a meeting, whatever they may be, to pre commit to the possibility of being wrong. How about that? And we can really think about it, right? We all fall prey, or most of us fall prey to the so-called sin of certainty, where our preconceived ideas or our feelings take on the certainty, and I hold on to that certainty to prove me right, regardless of what it does. So, Julia, when she asks that we pre commit to the possibility of being wrong, she's actually saying, let's pre commit to being vulnerable. Can we do this? What does it take for us to be vulnerable to evaluation, reevaluation of our preconceived ideas, our preconceived notions and behaviors, and understand how to do this in a way that is very productive, like she said. Uh, how to disagree productively. Anyways, there is a movie in the 1950s called 12 Angry Men. And somehow I keep thinking the movie is black and white, but it may not be. And it's in so many words. It's a movie about a jury trial of a man who's been accused of murder. And as the movie starts, we have 11 of the 12 jurors that are like, "Psh, no need to talk about it. We know, we can see that this man is guilty. That's all." And of course, the storyline, a whopping 2 hours of this movie, is all about the invitation to each and every one of the jury to admit that maybe their immediate knee-jerk reaction to the evidence that was given, and in this case, a bad lawyer, but besides the point, that maybe we should consider the belief that it is possible that there is a different story than was given to us. It is so simple, isn't it? If we're talking now back to social transformation, if for us to transform our society for the better, we need to be able to look for concepts and values that we hold dear. To be able to evolve, we must be able at the same time to identify and evaluate, and if necessary, render obsolete our archaic structures of thoughts, including in the case of the 12 angry men, the no, I believe he's guilty, and no, maybe he's not, right? So that's a extreme distance from the decision of a certain position to reconsider, and by reconsidering, making yourself vulnerable. And we got to do this, and Joanna points that out. We got to do this, which is the yin and yang of this discussion, right? We got to do this without erasing our history. Human beings do not survive without our roots. And I like to bring another reference here, which is the book by Leon Denis, After Death, where he discusses the spiritual, right, the spiritual outcomes. I'm trying to get a better word here. Outcomes after we die from a corporeal death. But in doing that, and it's quite a thick book, in the after death, he starts the book by bringing to us the very, very rich history of the societies that form the basis of our thinking. We're talking about here Western thinking, and it's quite beautiful because for example, he starts with the creeds, the belief systems of India, Egypt, Greece, so on and so forth. But Joanna de Angelis also recognizes, for instance, the beauty of, say, pagan, right, the pagan doctrine of ancient Greece and Rome. She doesn't say that we should be pagans, but she recognizes their beauty. And she also recognizes, that's the looking with your eyes open, right? Its abuses. And she sees the birth of Christianity replacing those earlier religions and belief systems that had become obsolete, right? Yet, she says, but it's not a once and done. We cannot forget the historical accounts, for example, of the Middle Ages in Christianity and how they demonstrated really terrible and different abuses of power. So for us today, it is important to look at what's going on in our society. It is through this deep analysis that we can see perhaps similar trends. Let's open our eyes to see that hypocrisy, prejudice, arrogance, they are all the opposite of what we want, which is this idealized social fabric that it is really a place that we should be inserted in and we should belong to. So let's talk a little bit about a different discussion here, which is the idea of herd mentality, right? So polarized society and then herd mentality. How do we ensure we have room for our authentic self? How do we ensure we can, as this immortal souls, right? Immortal spirits that we are, we spirits evolving journey toward our individuation. How do we ensure that we can do that? And what I mean by that is that how can we deal with our sense of discomfort, discontentment without being expelled or exiled from a social group that I belong, right? And it's very interesting because if we think about it, right, how do we create an opportunity for the well being of a group at the same time that we allow for each individual member of that group to deal with his or her own, oh, say, issues, um, mistakes, transgressions? As we know, failure is inevitable. And it is how we learn, how we grow. We see in that area when we discussed, right, the social polarizations, and the need to be part of the group, right, that is potentially polarizing. And but we are also individuals within that group that may be dealing with issues as well. So if you go back to the beginning of the chapter, Joanna introduced this society that we live in without credibility, trust, or love. This is where we inhabit today. We mistrust each other. We we don't feel that there is credibility, reputation, etc. We're always looking with a position of suspicion, and this polarized society that is basically a society that there is no room for trust, or right, if we don't have consensus in it, we are now finding a recipe for disaster. The structure that requires a polarized society is exactly in the subgroups there is a total consensus, which, as we said before, it doesn't work because within the group there will always be lack of consensus, driven by our own sense of discomfort and individuality. So, if we think about polarized society and subgroups that are formed, the no social norm of those various groups, it's all about who is right, who is wrong. It is really the need, the desire to highlight I can only be right if I demonstrate to the world how wrong the other group is or subgroup is, all their failures. And we have this sense of I am good, you're not. And boy, this breeds personalism and indifference regarding that overarching social transformation we talked about. So, if you think about it, our bent towards selfish behavior feeds this new ecosystem that is based on chaos and degenerative conflicts. And while we fall prey between herd mentality and our need for authenticity, right? And we are caught in the middle. We follow and we identify with the need for consensus and our need as biosocial animals to become part of a larger group, a larger community. And when that larger group demands this total sense of obedience, right, it does not erase our inherent desire to quietly live our own existential conflict, frustration, excuse me, frustration, dissent, etc. Oh my goodness. Let me get some water. My apologies. So, anyways, back to what I was saying, right? We somehow decide to live a quiet life of discontent, right? And if we think about it, this is really all about our existential conflicts. And what are those existential conflicts? They're just the big ones, right? Insecurity, mistrust, but also our phobias, our I don't know, jealousy. There is a long list. Actually, Joanne, I believe it's her eighth book in this collection is called Existential Conflict. And I tell anyone who's anyone, you cannot die without ever reading that book. It is absolutely phenomenal because it brings each one of them their causes, potential causes, and their potential solutions. But, anyways, within our day to day life that is brooding with our insecurities and mistrust, we actually become quite suspicious of everyone else's behavior. We suffer, and because of it, we become the very reason the social group may fall apart. Does this make sense to you? So, as we conclude our discussion today, I just want to say that it is our duty as individuals going through conflicts, we all do, to have courage. The courage to open our eyes, to be able to identify the issues that further restricts us. Uh, Fear, for example, is a trigger mechanism. And while most of us feel powerless to do anything that will impact social transformation, Joanna de Angelis gives us this urgent and indispensable call to action. We all must look for clarity. We and as we go through those conflicts, she says, listen, it's okay to identify that those conflicts are getting to be so big that you may need assistance, right? And maybe psychotherapy or anything. But please know that we all need guidance and clarity while we are living through what we're going through right now. She also reminds us that it is the duty of the social group to assist all of us, especially those of us that are going through inner conflicts. And examples may be all sorts of mental health issues, such as, I don't know, phobia, anxiety, trauma, any other pathological um, state, right? And this duty is especially important to those who are going through this fragmentation, this destructuring, this distress, those who are in pain. That's our duty as a society to provide that support. So it is somehow that I close this discussion, the chapter, by bringing a final thought that it is very comforting to know that the so-called degenerative societal conflicts, they tend to disappear when we're able to provide balance in harmony through our own individual growth, this microcosmos, right, that we have in, through the use of self-discovery. And in turn, as we embark into this, we contribute to the balance of the social fabric of this macrocosmos that is where we live on. So, with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me. I like to invite you to join me next chapter, and next week we'll close the fourth part of the book. As just as a reminder, we discuss the chapter called "First Place and the Essential Being." The fifth part of the book, it's quite good because it's all about modern diseases. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for being with me today, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.